Are we unmuted? Hello, friends and family. The Struggle is Real in Grief webcast podcast and the Verret Ministry would like to welcome you to our first annual Grief Symposium. And this year, we've chosen to start with our youth and young adults. And we want to make sure also that you share this with your friends and your family to make sure that everyone gets to see this wonderful opportunity with our youth.
What we've discovered, and of course, I'm the other co-host. I'm Leon Verret. I'm the other half. She's the better half. Grief is no respecter of persons. Age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. In other words, if you're rich or if you're broke, nothing protects you or really shields you from the body blow of grief.
Yeah.
But most look at the youth and the young adults in this society, and especially in church, and feel that they can just bounce right back without any noticeable scars, or so it seems. Today, we're going to get to the truth straight from the lips of our youth and our young adults.
Yes.
We're going to ask a few probing questions that should lead to some hopefully very candid answers. And maybe we'll even get some methods that will help us older folks deal with this struggle that we call grief. We have two other individuals that are very special that are on with us today. We have two friends, one I've known since grade school and the other since high school. And I know many are probably wondering, well, that's only been a couple of years ago, I'm sure. But it's been a few years. We have Dr. Terry Swenson and we have Dr. Ronald McGowan. And I'm going to ask them to just give us a little snippet of what they do, of who they are and what they do. And time-wise, we're going to ask them one more time because I know them both. They can talk. Keep it pretty short, guys. Ron, since you're already unmuted, we're going to start with you, Dr. McGowan.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you and Vanessa for this opportunity to be a part of this very necessary service that you're providing, ministry, I should use that term instead. What you've been doing over the past several months, I guess a little over a year now, is a very fantastic thing. And I'm just grateful for what you're doing.
Thank you.
I am a medical doctor. I am the medical director of palliative care at the Riverside University Medical Center out in Moreno Valley. It's interesting. I'll just say this quickly here. When we think about grief, it's a response to loss. And in this life, we have many losses, and the severity of the loss is quite variable. I lost my father in 1995. There was one type of loss that continues to creep up in terms of what I feel emotionally about that loss. And then the most recent loss was a loss of a career that I spent some time trying to establish. And in medicine, it was my place. It was my home. And in moving from West Virginia back to California, where I grew up, and as you mentioned, you and I were in grade school together, high school and college, in fact. But in coming back, the intention was to continue with that career, but I could never break into the field out here. And I don't think it was part of God's plan. What I'm doing now is excellent as well. And so I'm grateful, but I do grieve my prior career because, as I said, it was where I thought I made a huge difference. I loved it. I thought I was good at it, and therefore, it should continue. But many things in life are for a certain time period of your life. And sometimes we have a difficult time trying to pull ourselves away from it. Sort of like Michael Jordan, when he kept coming back out of retirement, and the quarterback for Pittsburgh, I can't remember his name, Brett Favre, he kept coming back, because it's what you enjoy and what you do well, but Father Time tends to bring about change. And I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ron. Dr. Terry.
Hi, how are you doing? Can you hear me? Am I good?
Yes.
You're good.
Yeah, I've known both of these guys since my high school years, and they're dear to my heart. My job is I work at Loma Linda University. I'm the director for university spiritual care, which means that we give chaplain and spiritual care to the students and employees in administration. And I really I resonate with what Ronald was saying. There's all kinds of grief. The ones we think of mostly is when we lose a loved one.
Yes.
And I live in a realm where I am cognizant of that every day. I never really wanted to be a medical guy, Ronald. Here I am. And you can be very paranoid because there's so many things you can get and die from. There just are.
Yeah.
So how do you process that? How do you process grief of not obtaining a position you want, or of aging, or of losing loved ones? We do not have a culture that deals well with grief.
True.
We don't.
Right.
And it happens at every age. I'm blessed that most of my work is done with young adults, and have been for a while. But how do we process grief? What do we do with that? What's a right way and a wrong way? Yeah. And I look forward to being a part of this symposium. Thank you very much for letting me be a part of this and contribute. Waiting to hear what everybody has to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Huh?
Well, we have just met our doctors, and now it's time to meet our distinguished young adults.
Yeah, don't let Ron and Terry know that they're not really the important ones here.
What?
It's these youth and young adults.
Yes, they are definitely important, and their voices definitely need to be heard. So what I'd like for you to do is share with us briefly a recent loss and how it impacted you, or whichever one most desperately impacted you, and your name and your age. So I want you to share your name, your age, and the loss that you most recently experienced, or one that was most impacting for you.
You want to start with?
Let's start with Matthew.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew, and I'm 20 years old.
Mercy.
And the loss that impacted me the most was definitely my dad passing away. And it'll impact me for like the rest of my life. But that happened almost 2 years now, but it hasn't yet been 2 years.
Okay.
Donovan.
All right. I'm Donovan. I am 32. And I would say the most recent loss that has impacted me the most would probably be the loss of my little brother. It was back in 2012. So it's been a little over 8 years ago, going on 9 years now. But that's something that'll always stick with you. And the way that has impacted me, for one, I miss my brother every day, but also, you can't take life for granted. One moment we're here, the next moment we're not. So we have to make the most of life with the breath that we have while we have it.
Mercy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
How about Danielle?
Hello, my name is Danielle, and I'm 16 years old. And are we talking about losses of like our family members or loved ones?
Yes.
I really can't pinpoint like one that's been most impactful.
Mhm.
And I guess for 16 years, I lost quite a few people in my life who I loved. I can say probably the most recent one was my great cousin and my cousin Barbara, and she passed away a few months ago.
Mm. Thank you for sharing. Johnny?
Hi, my name is Johnny. I'm 15 years old, and a recent loss that impacted me probably the most would be losing my grandmother this past June. Um, that definitely impacted me because she was my whole life. She raised me, you know, I was around her my whole entire life, and then when she passed, my life just completely turned around.
Mm.
So yeah.
Wow.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Aisha.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we need your picture, Aisha.
Yeah, I'm trying to, all of a sudden it started to experience technical difficulties. I'll try to bring it up,
Okay.
but quickly, my name is Aisha McCleary. I am 22 years old, and the most recent loss that I've had is the loss of one of my dear friends, my cousin Barbara. She used to live with us. She would babysit us all the time. She's very, very close to us. And she recently died. It was like maybe a couple months ago. So it's fairly recent.
Mm.
But yeah, that's been interesting. But I've had a lot of grief in my life, so it's a little easier this time.
Yes.
Okay, next, how about Jessica?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Davidson. I am 22 years old, and I will say a loss that impacted me most recently was also the loss of cousin Barbara. I have cousins on this as well. Her loss impacted me, but I will say even more so recently, I've really been impacted by the loss of my grandfather, who I lost in 2016, and my dear aunt and godmother, who I lost in 2015. And that's impacted me more now. So because as I'm going through life and getting older, I'm appreciating, you know, their wisdom and all the stories they've instilled in me. And it's kind of impacting me now because I'm just really missing them even more as I'm growing up. So I will say that's what's impacted me the most.
And we're gonna talk. We're gonna ask. I know I see Ephraim over there, but we're making Ephraim last. We're gonna try Camille.
Hi, I am Camille. I am 24 years old, and I would say that the loss that I've experienced quite a few just in this year. But the one that I would say, impacted me the most would be the loss is not necessarily of a person, though I have experienced that loss, but the loss of the ability to be with family. Just in COVID,
Wow.
the time that the situation that we find ourselves in, I consider that a loss. I was not able to spend holidays, Thanksgiving with my family. Couldn't spend my mom's big 60th birthday with her. I'm not going to be able to spend Christmas or New Year's with my family. And I consider that a loss. And that is definitely impacting me quite a bit. So.
Wow. Wow. Ephraim. Ephraim.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ephraim Bernard. I just want to say thank you to Mama Hannah and Pop Leon for, hosting us. And I also want to say hello to Brother Donovan. It's been a minute. I know I just skipped all the formalities. Forgive me. But perhaps the most impactful, like death for me was the death of my best friend in college, Justin. And the two biggest things that I've learned from that instance is, one, that God is very real. and two, that it's okay to talk to someone, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said that. That is something that is very, it's something that is, folks don't like to do. They don't like to talk to somebody about it. That's not what we as a people do.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, that more people don't take that opportunity to find someone to talk to. So we thank you for sharing. Thank you for being open, pulling back those emotional layers to share with us and share with our viewers. Now, and that's pretty significant. Any loss is significant, but for young people also to have had, like one of you said that I've had several, or a couple of you said that I've had so many. There's a lot of mourning. There's a lot of grieving that's going on all around us, and we thank God for His presence in spite of that.
Okay, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna mention a little scripture here, because as Christians, we're taught that we don't, or we're not supposed to grieve like everybody else grieves, and really that's quoting from 1 Thessalonians 4:13. What is your opinion on that statement and text? Do we grieve or don't we grieve? Anybody can jump in.
Well, grieving itself is a part of the human experience. So to say that, we don't feel sadness or, loss or hurt or feel repercussions from whatever the loss may be. In the case of the scripture, Paul's talking about, the lack of hope. So when we grieve, there's a depression within grieving without hope. We all get depressed, but there's a different type of despair along with that depression when you truly have no hope. So Paul is saying that we have a different hope with us as believers, knowing that, this isn't the final curtain. So although that, we lost, these folks, there's still hope that there's joy of that on the other side.
Wow. Anybody else want to chime in? Excellent. Thank you, Donovan.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, just going off of what Donovan said too, even Jesus himself wept when he was on earth. Yeah. And that's like, it's the most simple way of just showing that it's okay to cry and like show emotions whenever you are feeling that way and you're sad. But also he knew that Lazarus was going to be raised back at the same time. But he still allowed himself to show those emotions and go through that grieving process, even though he knew what was going to happen. So.
Well, what I don't appreciate is Matthew looking at my notes on because that we use that all the time in when we're talking to people and in our sessions. I know that someone else. Did you have something?
Yeah, let me see if there's another young person first that wants to chime in.
Yeah, I can chime in on this one. So I actually studied 1 Thessalonians 4:13, and I have kind of a different take than Donovan does. I feel like grieving as a Christian allows you to stay having a very soft heart. Like I feel like when someone goes through something, they kind of want to buckle up, shield from the world, and kind of almost like when you get a cut and your skin scars over and it's a lot tougher. But I think that when we have Jesus, we're still allowed to keep our hearts soft and open to other experiences and to empathize with other people. And so we aren't grieving in a way that's as if we have to fight against the world. We're grieving in a way that it's an experience, we get through it, and yet we can still love and appreciate and encounter new experiences without that fear.
I remember Dr. Ron mentioned something about grieving being such a varied experience, because as your personality, sow your grief.
Right, right. So I'd like to ask Dr. Swenson, what Aisha just said is that, you know, it makes you, it should make your heart more soft. But we know that there are a lot of instances when that is not the case. That's great in the times when it is, but sometimes it's not for some individuals. What would you say to a person who is angry and who doesn't have a soft heart, who's really kind of hardened about what's happened?
Can I say something about what you just said?
Yes.
I think that sometimes Christians find it difficult to, you know, just accept the grieving process or to accept like those emotions, I guess, either from themselves or other people, because perhaps it feels like it shows, you know, a lack of faith or a lack of understanding God. But I think I would say to anyone, no matter what stage of the grieving process that they're in, that it's okay. And I think sometimes we don't understand that it's okay. It's okay. Like anger is an emotion that God gave us. Like we can be angry. Jesus has been angry. God has been angry. And I think if that is something that you need to work through in the grieving process, then you need to be okay with working through it, or else you're not going to work through it.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Dr. Terry, can you add to that?
I don't like Matthew and I don't like Danielle. Yeah, I can add to that. So part of my career was pastoring churches. Most of my career has been as a chaplain. And everybody thinks Loma Linda is Adventist, and it's not. Maybe less than 40% of students at Loma Linda are Adventists. We've got over, what's the last count? 70 different religions and cultures here. Okay? All kinds of ages. Well, why am I saying that is, I find that, number one, there's the spiritual script that's written for everybody, the Christian script, there's the Adventist Christian script, and then there's societal scripts that are written. What do I mean by that? I've met cultures and dealt with people that grieving and death is a part of their culture, in the sense that just like birth and life, there's death. For those of us here in the West, in America, we pretend we don't die. We glorify it in movies, but in real life, we do everything to keep death away from us. And then for when we hit death, we don't know what to do with it. So you have the script of what I've heard, and Danielle and Matthew, I just love what you guys said, and others. But then we get the script like, well, we know that Jesus is coming, and Thessalonians 4 was mentioned, you know, so don't grieve, you know. And so people feel like it is a lack of faith or even betraying following Jesus if we grieve. And I'm so glad that everybody pointed out that tears, grief, and anger are okay. And I tell people that it's okay. There's no script for grief. There's Kubler-Ross had said there's denial, there's anger, there's grief, there's bargaining and acceptance, and everybody goes through it differently. There's no script. The issue comes is if you get stuck in one of those. You never move on from anger. You never move on from depression and tears. But other than that, I just say people, that's part of your healing process.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you. I see Jessica's hand. I see your hand up there, Jessica. Go on and chime in.
Yes, what everyone had mentioned before, I'm so glad it was brought up, because there is a misconception as Christians that grieving, as was said, is a lack of faith. And then there's also a taboo where if, you know, you have those feelings of sadness or even feeling depressed, it's almost like, you know what, just shut up about your sadness and just pray about it. Everything is going to work out because God's in control, which is true because God is indeed in control. But what can happen sometimes is something, a term I heard recently called toxic positivity, where you're almost using this negative coping mechanism of pretending not to be sad and pretending to be happy and kind of plastering this fakeness about you. But over time, you still have those unresolved feelings of grief, of sadness, and depression and stress still building up. And eventually, you know, when you try to stuff a closet with a bunch of toys that you tried to hide from your room because it was dirty, it will eventually spill out, and you really won't know what to do with all of those emotions. And so I think it is quite healthy to give yourself permission to feel every emotion. We like, you know, feelings of happiness, of excitement, and we should also be able to give ourselves permission to feel feelings of sadness. And so I think that's very important for us as Christians, because when we talk about not grieving as the world grieves, as for those who don't have hope, we know that when we have that grief, we have someone to turn to. So it's not to say that grieving is bad, but it's to say that, hey, as a Christian, I can grieve, but I know that I have some sort of peace, some sort of solace I can turn to in my grief. So that's what I want.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. You haven't had that experience with the toys in the closet. Oh, that's another program.
I'm glad you said that, because some people feel guilty. And I don't know if either Dr. Swenson or Dr. McGowan has experienced that with their people who they work with, but sometimes people feel guilty about their emotions, and then instead of expressing them, they just kind of hold them in, and that's unfortunate. Have you come across that, Dr. McGowan?
Yes, I have. And I think one of the things that is important in helping someone through the grief process is that you have to be a listener. If you're the one trying to do the helping, it's important. Presence is important. Listening is very, very important. I really appreciate Jessica's comments. And grief is a process. It's not a situation where, you know, maybe I, as a provider, would write a prescription and send someone home and say, take this, you know, twice a day for 10 days and you're going to be good. You know, this takes months. And what the grief process is really doing, it is an adjustment to loss that is helping the patient to get to a new normal.
That's it.
And so, you know, that can be very much of a challenge. I think it was mentioned earlier, a person's background, their culture. I think Dr. Swenson has helped us with that, talking about the number of different cultures there at Loma Linda. All of those things have to be taken into the context of the individual. And from there, you know, it's hopefully we can see how we can help the person through this transition. But grief is not something that you probably should just do by yourself, at least for some people. Some people can handle it reasonably well. It is a normal response. It is a process that we think that people should go through in order to reach that new normal. But yeah, the talking is very, very important. In fact, if grief becomes dysfunctional, one of the great ways to handle that is to have someone that you can talk to. Sometimes it requires a professional, and there are tools that can be used to assist with that. And by the way, speaking of tools, there are lots of apps these days that can help with this sort of thing. There's an app for everything, it seems like today.
True.
But yeah, the talking is very, very important.
Yes. Anyone else?
I would say in regards to, you know, based on what we feel, you know, something I came to terms with after the death of my father, also as my brother, is that you got to let yourself feel what you feel, how you feel it, when you feel it, in order to process through it. A lot of times, you know, it's natural to want to, you know, sweep that under the rug. You know, we have a society that, you know, caters to not showing weakness, so to speak, especially when it comes to men. You know, men don't like to seem vulnerable with their emotions. So a lot of times, you know, you got a lot of dysfunctional men trying to go around who are carrying these weights around them because they don't want to let that out. And so, and the only way to get it out is to let it out. And you can't let it out by sweeping it under the rug.
Mm.
And you know what? That's my son over there. And I'm getting ready to start not appreciating any of these young people because they are all up in my notes. And but in all truth, this is why we selected these young people. Donovan, that is so right. Men have been taught most of their lives to suck it up, stiff upper lip. Do not, you cannot be seen as a weak, emotional person. And my scripture tells me, and then I see Johnny's hand, my scripture tells me in Isaiah 53, speaking about Jesus, it says that he is a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. We skip over that part a lot. People don't preach a lot on that part, that Jesus was very emotional and he was acquainted with grief. And I'm not going to get into looking up the Hebrew and the Greek and all that on it. I did, but it's deeper than just what we call your regular grief. Yeah. So, Johnny, I see your hand.
I just wanted to add on to what Brother Donovan said. How he said that like we need to let our emotions out, and we need to feel it, how we feel it, when we feel it, where we feel it. Because I feel like as a society, like you said, we do try to put on like a strong look, and we always try to portray how strong we are, when in reality we're really like going through all of these emotions that we feel. And I feel like holding it in is only going to make the problem worse. And like Doctor said, he said that if you want to help somebody, or like talking about how you feel is definitely like the best route to go, because like I said, holding it in can like drive you to a very dark place, that the more you hold it in, the deeper you're going to be driven. So yeah, that's what I want to add.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That makes perfectly good sense. I want to ask, well, do I see hands still, Jessica? Or is that from previous?
Or you never took it down? Is that still your hand, Jessica?
Oh, no, I forgot to take it down.
Okay.
I have my hand up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to say something, because I think what Donovan said, and then I think it was that Johnny? Is that you? Yeah. Donovan, I live my life with anger, because what I went through in my life, you don't show weakness, because if you're vulnerable, you're a victim. Okay. So for men, especially, and it's so dysfunctional, but the only way, one of the ways, either through sexuality or anger, we can get rid of our emotions. And those can both be destructive. And Johnny, you triggered a thought with me. I'm sitting in my office at work, and right next to my desk is a chair. I talked to a young woman just this week who works in our food services, that I love all of them over there. They feed me for one thing, and they're nice to me. So I'm kind of like a stray animal hanging around there. But one of the other ladies who worked there said, Pastor Terry, this young lady, she said, you should talk to her. And I go, why? She goes, her sister just died. To make the story short, her sister was in Vegas. They found her body dead from the party. I'll leave it at that. From bad drugs. And so I went to her, and she's one of these people, stiff upper lip, because that's what the area she comes from. And we started to talk, and I just gave her a hug. When she came around, I said, may I hug you? Got to be proper. And she said, yes. And she kind of folded into me. And I said, can you come and talk for a little while? So she got permission. And she came into my office right over here, and we talked, and she started telling me the steps. And I mean, it was horrific to hear what she went through, where they had to go and find where her sister was and all the things that went on. She was telling me about taking her mother and what happened with her other siblings and taking care of her sister's children, her children. And this woman is struggling hard to make it. Young lady, only in her mid-20s. And I just looked at her and I said, you know, and I said her name. I said, I want you to know something. This is a safe place. And I said, you're being strong for everybody else, but how are you feeling?
Wow.
And that gave her permission and she collapsed.
Yes.
She hadn't cried.
Wow.
And so sometimes all we just need to do is say, wow, that hurts. How are you really feeling? And to open up a space for people and just acknowledge, you know, hey, human to human, it's okay. What are you feeling?
Yeah.
So I thank you for the observations that you guys are making. Good stuff.
And to piggyback on what Dr. Swenson said, I think that, you know, a lot of times, you know, especially, you know, those of us in the church, he was talking about, you know, scripts, you know, we're quick to throw, you know, that script on there that, you know, the Bible says this, the Bible says that, but it's like the saying that, you know, if somebody's hungry, they don't care what you say until you feed them. You hadn't met that emotional human need. In the books, A Grief is Observed, C.S. Lewis talks about, you know, talk to me about the truth of religion, I'll listen gladly. Just talk to me about the duty of religion, I'll listen submissively. But don't come to me talking about the consolations of religion, and I'll suspect that you don't understand.
Wow.
And so a lot of times, you know, we try to put a Band-Aid on grief and not truly try to understand why it is that people are grieving.
Wow.
Wow.
For one of the doctors, either one who wants to chime in, I read an article recently that talked about how we set our children up for withholding their emotions or not validating their emotions when they're little. Someone gave the example of like when a child breaks a toy or their toy breaks and they start crying. A parent will say, stop that crying, we'll just get you another one. Do you think things like that actually contribute to especially males wanting to suppress those emotions?
And
Doctor.
And Dr. McGowan, please chime in. I'm older. I know that'll shock the young people, but I'm older. And I don't know if it's so much so now, but for those of us that are boomers are coming through it, it was definitely a thing like, don't cry. My sisters could cry. It was okay for I have 3 older sisters. It was okay for them to cry. In fact, it was almost expected. But when it came to me, come on, Terry, stop that crying. Big men don't cry. Or like when I scrape my knee or do something like that. And it's like, well, yeah, real men don't cry. Big men don't cry. Movies, cartoons, everything reinforced that statement that that if you're a man, you don't cry. If you cry, you're weak. You're not a real man.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and you keep your stuff to yourself. You keep in control, and that's why so many men have issues to this day.
Wow.
And then when I finally got married and had my children, and my youngest is a boy, I pulled him aside and I said, listen, I need to talk to you. I said, in Deuteronomy, it says that the sins of the fathers are visited unto their children to the,
how many ever generations, right?
3rd or 4th generations. And when I studied that, I thought, wow, I mean, I get mad at people like, Leon, you messed with me, man, I'm gonna take you out. But that's like God saying, not only am I so mad at you, I'm gonna get you and your kid and your kid's kid and your kid's kid's kid. And that's not really what he's saying there. And science has proven this. What God is saying is, look, you got to deal with this. If you don't open up and deal with it, it's going to have ramifications generationally. With such psychological studies and genome studies have shown that these things stay in families for about 3 generations till someone breaks it.
Wow.
So I told my son, I said, look, I don't know how to do this. I didn't have it because my dad was like that from his dad.
Mhm.
But I acknowledged I didn't know how to handle it, and we tried to learn together. So I think by coming on this, and I thank you guys for putting this on for people to say it's okay. Maybe we can forge some way forward that this stuff stops. And it's okay, and it's natural to have tears, and that actually it's healing. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Wow.
is.
Well, at this time, I want to make sure that we haven't missed any hands. At this point, we want to just briefly share how it is that my husband and I came about to working in grief ministry. We felt that the Lord actually called us to this ministry, and we believe that God equips the called. And so while we were still in the talking stages of it, we were visiting with family in California at Kansas Avenue. And Camille,
It happened to be a youth day.
Yeah, it was youth day, and Camille Bell was the speaker. And so she, a part of her message, she shared that, a student had gotten killed, and she had a desire. I'm going to let her share in her own words what that desire was, because she actually expressed that I wish someone had, and I'm going to let her share that with us.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I consider it a privilege to have joined online here. I really have enjoyed what everyone had to share, and I have just a few things. Because as Mr. Leon, you said earlier, I'm a busy teacher, so I did not get back to you all in time.
That's okay.
But I appreciate you guys still giving me the opportunity to just share a little bit about what's on my heart. And so I am a teacher in Atlanta now. This is my second year teaching. Before this, I was a student at the Oakwood University.
There you go.
And I had the privilege of being the AY leader while I was there. And the AY position, a lot of people would compare it to being a pastor of a church, running your own ministry like that in such a capacity where it's thousands of people, not just at the school, but abroad who are tuning in to watch. They compare it to a pastor, being a pastor of a church. And I say that to kind of set up the scene of kind of what I went through. So the school year started, we went through August and the first couple of weeks of September. And I would say AY was going rather well. And then on September 16th, late at night, one of our students was killed just outside of campus. And the whole campus found out together the following morning. And it was as if a storm was sent rushing through the entire campus.
Wow.
People just fell apart. I remember being, we went to the bell tower for school-wide prayer time, I guess. And I remember seeing girls and guys just bawling, weeping. Girls were falling to the ground, just broken. I went into the freshman dorm in order to kind of do some chaplaincy, I don't know, connection with some of the students. And then hearing girls scream throughout the hallway, just feeling low, just broken. And I was in leadership mode for the entire day. And then after the day ended, I went back to my room trying to go to sleep. And suddenly leadership Camille went out the window and there was just me. And I fell apart, couldn't handle it, could not handle it, couldn't be alone. And thus began a week of panic attacks, just all week straight. Couldn't go to class, stayed in bed. Not at my bed, by the way. I went to a friend's house and because I couldn't be by myself. in bed all week, couldn't function, could not function. Then Friday came and we had AY, we call it AYM release. And this is a time where everyone on campus comes together to literally release the stresses and worries of the week. But this week was arguably one of the most horrible weeks of anyone's college experience that had been there at that point. And I was responsible for being the leader during that time, having to pull myself back together in order to lead the campus through their mourning. That was began with a panic attack, went to AY, and then right after AY ended with the panic attack, couldn't handle it again.
Wow.
After that, I was having pretty severe anxiety. Panic attacks kind of settled, but severe anxiety, just scared. Loud noises had me on edge all the time. Couldn't be alone. It was like Thanksgiving break a few months after that. And Friday for Black Friday, I went to the mall, had a panic attack in the mall because there's just so many people around, just a series of events that I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle it. And it brought me to a place even lower, because I knew if I couldn't handle it, how was I supposed to help the campus handle it? How was I supposed to help bring the campus through this thing, man? And that set me down a path of resenting God. I remember there was one week in particular that I was praying, and then I was with my campus, one of my campus father, and I was crying, and he was holding me while I cried, and I was just telling him I was mad. I said, I'm so mad at God. I'm so mad. I'm praying and I'm asking him to bring me peace and asking him to bring this campus peace. And we still feel like we're in this horrible, horrible place. I was like, why is he not listening to me? Why is God not listening to me? Why won't he answer this prayer? I feel like my prayers are just hitting the ceiling, just keep hitting the ceiling. He's not listening. And I was so upset with God, And I got to a place where I was okay again. I wouldn't say that I was back on board with God or anything. I wouldn't say that I was in a place where me and him were cool and stuff, but it was just like time went on and I learned to adjust. I learned to function again, which is not a great place to be. It's not a place that most people want to be. Yes, I could function, but you don't want to just function. Like, you want to live life. You want to enjoy life. You want to know God and enjoy God's presence. You know what I'm saying? So it was not a great place to be, but that was better than having panic attacks all the time. So can't complain, right? So anyhow, that lasted for several months thereafter. And then that brings us to about this year. That happened in 2018. I was functioning my way through life for over a year. And then this year began. And this year is what I refer to as the perpetual bad day. It is a never ending bad day, right? Yeah. Something happens and then another thing happens and then another thing. Since January 1 all the way to this very moment, it's like every day, some kind of foolishness, some kind of nonsense is being thrown our way. And the same was true for myself personally. I started the year, the end of January. My cousin overdosed and was found dead in his mom's house. She was the one who found him. My auntie found him. And then the beginning of February, we flew there to funeralize him. And I remember being, I didn't even know the words to say it. Because yes, I had lost a cousin, and that obviously was hard for me. But it was a matter of seeing my family fall apart the way they did. It brought me back to the place that I was when Carvel was killed, seeing the campus falling apart and not being able to do anything to help them, not being able to do anything to comfort them. It brought me back to that place. So that's how my year began. And then COVID happened and everything got shut down. I'm out here in Atlanta. my whole family, everybody in my family is back in California. My extended family is in New York or Connecticut. And so I had no one near me. I was by myself during quarantine. My mom is a nurse and she was working on a COVID unit.
Oh, mercy.
And so I was scared for her life, literally scared for her life every single day. And then my dad has pre-existing conditions. So I was scared that when she goes home, maybe she might be taking something to my dad, you know,
Right.
just terrified and mad at God, like, why? Like, I can't catch a break, God. And then April came and my grandmother contracted COVID. She was sent to the hospital for a week, and 1 week later she was dead. And I got pissed at God all over again. Mad, like mad, like, God, why can't I catch a break? And I think this is why you all invited me, not necessarily to hear the things I've gone through, because I know I'm not the only one who's obviously gone through something this year alone. We've all gone through something in our lives. So people shared their best friend had passed, their cousin had passed, their brother had passed. Everyone on this call and everyone who may be watching, we've all gone through something, experienced some type of loss, whether it be a death, whether it be the loss of security, the loss of safety, the loss of a job this year, the loss of finances. We've experienced a loss. And we always think of loss in terms of somebody dying, but loss is so much more than somebody dying. Loss is feeling as though the rug has been snatched out from under you in more ways than one. We've all experienced some type of feeling. And what I came to understand why I was so angry with God throughout 2018 when Carvel passed, throughout the beginning of this year when my cousin passed and my grandmother passed. The reason why I'm so angry with God is because I was never taught how to mourn. I was never taught growing up in the church how to mourn. Now, the thing is, I was listening to someone speak one time and they brought a good point up. They said, in a Black church, in our church, right? How many times have you heard a sermon preached from the book of Lamentations? How many times have you heard a sermon preached from the book of Lamentations? Not Lamentations, chapter 3, verse 24 to 26, I think it is. Not the, this I call to mind, therefore I have hope, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his mercies never fail. Not that verse. Everywhere else in the Bible, or in the book of Lamentations, where Jeremiah is upset, is going through it, is depressed. When have you ever heard a sermon preached like that? Where a prophet who we are told to look up to is upset with God, is upset with what they're going through, is upset with the things that are happening around them. We're not taught that. We're taught weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Hold on to joy coming in the morning. Hold on to joy coming in the morning. That's what we're taught. And that is not fair. It is not fair, because it completely disqualifies our human experience. Yes, we are Christians. Yes, we are called to be unique people. We are called to be a set apart people. We are called to look at the world a little bit differently than those who may not be of our faith. Yes, all true. That does not mean we are not human. It does not mean we are not going to experience human emotion. And so how dare our church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Christian community, the Black Seventh-day Adventist Christian community, how dare our church not teach their young people how to mourn and how to navigate these emotions and get through the tough times? Because here's what it leads to. It leads to severe anxiety, severe depression, and severe PTSD that they then don't know how to handle. That's what it led to for me.
Okay.
To the point where I had to be put on medication just to be able to get through my day-to-day life, because I did not know how to be upset, be mad at God, and be human at the same time.
And you know
Be a
what?
Christian and trust in the Lord and be a human at the same time. I didn't learn how to do that.
Let me say this. Let me say this, Camille. You know that when you preached that sermon, we were in the middle of deciding, is this where God is leading us? Because when you're younger, you don't grow up saying, you know, I want to be grief ministries leader. You know, that's not something that it's something that chooses you. So because of the losses that we both went through, we were thinking about it. And when we got to that sermon and you mentioned, you said, this is what you said. You said, no one ever taught us how to grieve and still be okay with God.
That was powerful.
When you posed that question,
my
wife and I looked at each other and went, this is what we're supposed to do.
And I know that, and I want to address this with Dr. McGowan and also Dr. Swenson. I know that Camille is not the only person, not the only young person, not the only person that feels this way and that goes through this type of anxiety. What would you like to say to her and others who feel the way that she does at this time?
I can go first on that, if that's all right with Terry. There's a lot of spiritual stuff that could be said about what Camille said. And first of all, Camille, I want to thank you for sharing that very story with us and being able to hold it together.
Yeah.
Because I was feeling some of your pain as you were talking about some of those things there. First of all, there was so much in what you stated. The young man that died and the collective grief. That's one of the things that you shared with us. And cumulative grief. That goes back to what Terry was mentioning about not being able to express his feelings. It's interesting. Those feelings eventually come out. And so I would venture to say that some of the people that were crying on campus, they may not have known much of the details, but they are crying. Why are they crying? Because this event has tapped into their emotional cauldron. And so now all of this emotion is coming forth. So that's one aspect. And then the other thing that I think is very important to mention, when a person has cancer or a terminal illness, and we have time to sort of prepare for their death, there's a different grief process or experience compared to a person who dies suddenly, and especially suddenly from a trauma. In the latter circumstance where there's a trauma that takes a life, anxiety, PTSD, as you mentioned, panic attacks are much more common because the person has been snatched away, there are unresolved issues, there's the unfairness of the whole thing. And so we look to God and ask, well, why has this happened? And then you as an individual being responsible for so many young people, now your burden is even greater. And so in these situations where the anxiety component and everything that I mentioned there, the PTSD, the panic attacks, generalized anxiety, the whole bit is all under this label of anxiety. And so counseling is much more needed in those circumstances. And as you mentioned, sometimes medication is needed. Where I work, unfortunately, we have a fair number of young people in their teens and 20s and early 30s that come in from gunshot wounds to the head. And the families are just absolutely distraught. So, the anxiety component there is understandable and oftentimes needs to be managed. There's one other thing that you mentioned there, but I'm probably going to just turn this over to my friend Terry Swenson, because I think that Terry's going to do a better job of dealing with the spiritual aspect of this and the anger with God. I will say this though, in my line of work, anger towards God can present as physical symptoms. And so when patients are complaining of pains, we listen to the description of the pain, and just from the description, we can get an idea, well, this is probably not physical, but this may be emotional pain. This may be spiritual pain. So I'm so glad, Camille, that you shared this with us.
Yes, yes. Terry?
Yeah. Thank you, Ronald. I mean, first of all, on behalf of all pastors who have never preached that sermon, I apologize to you. A lot of us, it's a way we were trained. People don't like to hear those kind of sermons. Everybody wants to know there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Just suck it up till we get to that. It's like holding your breath till COVID goes away or the pain goes away and all the good stuff comes at the end, either here on this earth or near to come. But that's not what the Bible says. Maybe the best way I could say it to you is this. And all of you, just 1,000 sermons have popped into my head. Don't worry, I'm not going to do it. But perhaps this will help you. A few years ago, I say that and it could be 10 years. Let me think and check. Yeah, it was about, it's been a while ago, but a few years ago. I was at a point in my life, and people didn't know it, where every aspect of my life had blown up. If you've ever seen the old Disney movie of Aladdin in the Cave of Wonders, when all the rocks are blowing up because Abu the monkey grabbed the ruby and he's on the last one about to explode, I was there. And in every aspect of my life, there was loss. Every aspect of my life. People dying, personal illness. No, that's the one thing I didn't have was personal illness. Trauma with my different children, things in the job, financial, just everything. I went into a room. I claimed every promise I could because I know the Bible. And I brought them up and they were like ashes in my mouth as I spoke. And ultimately, I just said, God, I am dying here emotionally, spiritually, mentally. I know what I'm supposed to pray to you, but I can't. I said, I know you act the way you want, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm falling into a deep pit and there's rocks coming up and I'm going to be crushed on them. I need you to do something now. Now, usually God doesn't play that game. And he didn't answer me the way I wanted. I wanted a miracle to happen. I wanted somebody to knock on the door and say, well, we found all these bags of gold. We'll give them to you because we don't know. Or, that wasn't what happened. I'll tell you what happened. In my mind, I heard a voice, God's voice. And this is what he said. You're not in a pit, you're in a tunnel. Now I want to say I was in holy rapture to my God. No, I was not, because I'm not a perfect person. And I was so angry that that's what my mind heard. I go, you got to be kidding me. That's it. I'm not in the pit in the tunnel. Where's the answer? Where's the, I was irate. I'm a verbal processor. So I'm verbally processing around the room by myself. What does that mean anyway? And as I thought of it, certain things came to my mind. Number one, a pit is a hole and a tunnel is a hole. A pit is a vertical hole that you fall and hurt yourself. A tunnel is a horizontal hole. A tunnel takes you through the hardest difficulty that your travel needs to go through. You've got to go through it, but instead of over a mountain or under the ocean, like in the English Channel, the tunnel goes through the difficulty, but it's the fastest and the easiest way through it. And there's the proverbial end to a tunnel. There's light at the end of the tunnel. I sat there quiet. And then the voice said to me, and I'm walking in it with you. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because God, number one, you're with me. and your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The rod, the protection against the things that come at sheep, the staff, the guiding, prodding, directing part. I want you to hold on to that. In fact, all of the Bible, from the time Adam and Eve make their choice to the end, and the Gospels especially, show me where Jesus says, you're dancing down the yellow brick road and there's no more problems. He said, you see me go through stuff, you're going to go through stuff. But here's the difference. You have hope. Thessalonians 4. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. And here's one thing, and I'll quit with this. The number one question I get asked as a pastor and chaplain is this one. And it was reflective here. Why? Why God? Why did God, or why didn't God? And I'm going to tell you this, 98% of the time, he never answers that.
That's true.
He doesn't. Look at Job. Job, everybody's saying, Job, why don't you just curse God? We know you did this. And Job said, I didn't. And finally, Job rants and raves and says, if God were here, which is all of you, and I've said it too. Oh, God, if you were here, I'd let you know. And God actually shows up to Job. And then he says, Job, look, I'm going to answer your question. He said, but let me ask you one first. And then for 5 chapters, he goes, where were you? Read it sometime. And at the end, God just looks at Job. So yeah, now what's your question? And Job just goes, God never answered Job's question with why, but he did answer him with who. So, so grief, pain, it's part of it. But the difference is we're not, what's my word? That's not the end of it. I have seen people, and Ronald, Dr. McGowan, I know you've seen it, that people can live through horrendous things if they have one thing, and that's hope. And that's what we have. The gift of presence, that God never leaves us, even though and you can yell at God. And listen, I've said bad things to God. I'm going to tell you, but God and I have had it out. If I could have hit him, I would have. And God just says, it's like a little kid. It's like when my kids would come and they are upset and traumatized and they call for me and I hold me and they're like, punching dad and kicking dad. And I just hold them until they'd slump and cry. And that's what God does with us. And that's the difference between us and someone, because I've lived a life with no hope, is that God never leaves us. And eventually the promise comes true. I will restore the years the locusts took away. Anyway, thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow.
So I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Could I just add something on to what Chaplain Swenson was saying there?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm sorry. Just very quickly, I wanted to add to what he was saying that asking the question why is something that oftentimes gets a lot of us caught up, especially folk my age, because I think that people who get a little bit older have come to this conclusion that, oh, God knows what he's doing, blah, 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 blah. But people who are younger are not content with that. Like, I need to know why, and I need to know why right now. Like, you got to make sense of this thing. And I think that spiritual leaders, pastors, and those in authority, have made the mistake of defaming God by saying, oh, this was in God's will. And this is why this thing knocks us out. This is why this causes young people, youth and young adults to leave the church, because how is it in God's will? What type of God would have it in his will for my brother to die? What type of God would have it in his will for my grandmother to pass away? What type of God would have it in his will for this young man to be killed who was just there to stop a fight? All the other dudes were there fighting, they're alive, they're well. He was there to stop the fight and he's dead. What kind of God has that in their will? And these pastors and spiritual leaders brainwash us, number one, and number two, make the mistake of defaming God in that way by saying this thing is in God's will. But the Bible is clear about what God's will is. The Bible is clear that he told us, I know the plans I have for you, plans for good and not for evil, plans to give you hope and a future.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible is clear that God says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Nowhere in his word does it say that in his will is for us to experience our brother dying because such and such had to happen. Just because God can turn a test into a testimony doesn't mean he set that test up
Right.
for us to have heartbreak. Do not, that's an encouragement from me, do not, leaders and young adults who will soon have children and church leaders, do not make the mistake of telling your young person the reason that they experienced loss, the reason why they were molested as a child, the reason why they have gotten raped, the reason why that they are on their way to whatever and they're in trouble or they're in jail or whatever the case is, the reason why that their life sucks right now. Do not make the mistake of telling them that the reason for that is that it's in God's will. If somebody's asking the question why, it's okay to say, I don't know. that sometimes life just sucks.
Yeah.
Sometimes life just sucks. And that's what this ministry is all about, teaching us how to grieve through the sucky moments in life. Yes, weeping endures for the night. Joy comes in the morning, but right now it's still night.
Yeah.
And the night is lasting a really long time and it sucks right here. So I don't need to hear joy comes in the morning. I need help navigating the night, which is why I think Chaplain Swenson, what you hit it right on the head when you said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
Yeah.
That's the thing that taught me how to hold on, because God is with me.
Yeah.
Life sucks. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that life wasn't gonna suck. That was the thing that had me mad at God. God, if I continue to serve you, if I continue to sacrifice for you, why in the heck is my life sucking so much right now? Why are all the people around me dying right now?
Yeah, we definitely have to know.
Mad at God to
That God is
understanding
good.
God is walking with me through this pain. The same pain I'm experiencing is the same pain he's experiencing.
Yeah.
Have mercy.
Yeah.
Can I add something really quick, just to Camille? The other thing I learned is this, is that, you know, he doesn't just say, I'm walking with you. He expects me to do that with people.
Yeah.
See, just sit back and watch him, like with Family Barrett, what you're doing is exactly what God called you to do. And listen, just because I have no hair and the rest of it's white, I do not think I am perfect in this, because I've been enraged to think that way back of things, and Leon and Ronald, you'll know context. We didn't have cell phones, especially ones with videos that record the horrendous thing that white supremacy has done to the African American, the Black, and the Brown communities. It was happening then, and to see it come back with such vengeance is very traumatizing. And the anger that I have is that we did not tell you guys that that world was like that. And so you had to discover it with people being murdered for 8 minutes and 43 some seconds. And to see those things and to say, what is that? And so I say, where is God? And God says, I'm sitting right in you. What are you doing, Terry? What are you? He's saying to you, Camille, you have now walked in places people haven't, with grief that's unimaginable. What are you doing? And you started sharing it. And he goes, that's it. Yes, this world will never be perfect, and we try to make it. We try to establish church world or Christian world or Adventist world. But the point is, this world sucks. It's not as how it's meant to be. And that point, who was it, Matthew, or you were the one, John? Jesus wept. He knows he's doing resurrection, but he saw us here today. Yeah. He said, I did not create you that way. I didn't create you to go through that pain. And I did this, and it's not going to be this way forever. But while you're here, walk in it. and beat back the forces of darkness. Sorry, I'll be quiet. Put me on mute. You can put me on, you can put me on mute, man.
Yeah, I wanted to listen, Camille. There's a reason why you weren't able to show up at the time that you were to show up, but there's a reason why everybody is here today. Mm-hmm. And I want to tell you I appreciate it. And you almost messed me up because I can tell you were fighting tears, and I was fighting them right along with you. Mm. And I appreciate the things that you had to say, because it's very difficult. I want to go on, and then I'm gonna call on Aisha after I mention this to you, because here's the problem. I knew a pastor friend that in Whiteville that refused to cry. His father died, and that was his best friend. Mm. And for over a year, he didn't want to cry. He refused to, because he was a pastor. Mm. So he has to stand up for his people, and he can't show them that he's weak. And so some of you, he didn't feel he had the time for it. He ended up seeing somebody and then crying every week for a whole year in order to get over it. Mm. But some of you are close to high school graduation, college, undergrad graduation, grad school graduation, new jobs, job search. Mm. Some of y'all thinking about marriage. You better not be, but some of y'all thinking about marriage. How and when do you deal with all of this grief in the middle of all of these daily responsibilities? Do you even have time to grieve? And Camille already let us know that she already is dealing with students, mm-hmm. and how to do this teaching during COVID, mm-hmm. and all of this on top of grief. How do you find time? When do you take the time out to, what do you do with all of this pent up emotion? And now we're finding out you better release it. Right. And I see Aisha with her hand raised, and then I see Danielle.
Yeah. How do you find time for grief? That was a big question for me. I don't know if I'm kind of breaking up. You guys can hear me fine?
We can still hear you, yes.
Okay, great. So Camille, I am right here with you. Like when Carvel died, it was crazy. Like I was in chemistry when everybody found out, and literally somebody fell out right in my row. Wow. And somebody else started screaming down the hall. And honestly, it was crazy. It was crazy. And I had just seen him a couple days before. Mm. And so it was kind of shocking. But something that you did as AY leader, you may not have felt strong, but you were so vulnerable with us. And I think that was probably the most important thing, because everybody was just going through it, but we knew that we were going through it together. And one of the most impactful deaths in my life was my Auntie Charlotte passing. And it wasn't just that she was my aunt, but I kind of seen her as like a mentor, like a really big mentor in my life. I had wanted to shape my life after hers, after all the good stuff in hers. And when I went to Oakwood, I realized that I had so much to grieve over from her, because when she had passed away, I'm the oldest in my family. And so as the oldest, I have to kind of keep a stiff upper lip for everybody.
Wow.
But also my mother was so broken. Yeah. Everybody was so broken in my family that it was like, you can't talk to anybody about this. It was either people didn't want to talk about it, or as soon as you started talking about it, everybody started crying. And so there was no progress. Like there was no, how do I do this? No one knew, because everybody was broken. And I had to learn to make time for you, to make time to heal, because then you can't help anybody else. If your cup is empty, how are you going to pour into anybody else's?
Wow.
And I had to come to terms with that and seek a counselor on Oakwood's campus. And I just started talking to them. And honestly, when things got really rough, I didn't want to go, if I'm just being honest. But when I did go, which was consistent, very consistent, it was life-changing, because not only was I able to confront what I was going through, but also to be able to see it from a new perspective and to keep moving forward. And that was huge. And like I said, my cousin Barbara just died, somebody who had practically raised me in my teens. And I think I'm still in that denial stage that you guys had mentioned on that. But because I've taken the time to deal with the past ones, it feels different. It feels different. Like when Carvel died, and everybody was struggling because like Dr. Swenson or was it Dr. McGowan had said that it's a cumulative grief. And it definitely felt like that. It was like everybody was grieving. Even people who didn't even know him, they were grieving. People were getting tattoos of his name on their bodies. People were printing out shirts. We had like several ceremonies, and it still didn't seem like enough. But I remember being so angry. But since I had just dealt with my aunt's passing and finally gotten through it, even though it was a couple years later, I just kept visualizing. Well, one, I wasn't trying to stress myself out. So I was like, God, I'm upset. I'm very upset. But I know that you're just as upset as I am. And I was just talking to my little sister about this because somebody was just executed from the death penalty, Brandon Bernard.
Yes.
And she was saying, yeah, exactly. So she was saying, well, maybe God has a plan in all this. Maybe God, maybe he was supposed to be there to save somebody. I said, Ariel, don't say that. Don't say that. God hates this just as much, if not more than we do. Just because he can make a good thing out of a bad thing doesn't mean that he wanted this to happen. And so I would just envision God wrapping me up in a big hug everywhere I went. Everywhere I went, because I'm a very visual person. Whenever I was in class and I just felt that anxiety, I just imagined God and me in a big hug. And we didn't talk, because I knew if we started to talk, I would feel very passionate. I'd feel very angry. Why did this happen? Why couldn't somebody have saved him? Why didn't anybody call the police? Why did these things have to happen in the past? Why did my cousin Barbara have to die? Like, there's so many questions. So I would you have to be very calm and patient with yourself. And you have to make the time, because at this point, when you're in the tunnel, you can't focus on helping anybody else out of their tunnel. Blind gonna lead the blind. You can't do that. So you need to take the time to go to that counseling. Like, that's a priority. Like even if you have jobs and people have expectations, guess what? They'll find somebody else. They'll find somebody else to do it. You take care of you. You take care of whatever job you have to do. And those are the two things, because when you're broken, you start spreading that brokenness to everybody else. And next thing you know, more people are hurt because you didn't take the time to heal yourself. And so I think Uncle Leon's just right. Finding that time is super important.
Wow. Thank you.
I see Danielle.
And I think I saw Matthew, if I'm not mistaken, also. Danielle,
want to unmute yourself?
Yes. I think I was pretty much going to say a lot of what Aisha was saying, but I feel like there's things in our lives where we're kind of told and we're kind of raised to know that we make time for this. So if you want to be successful in school, then you make time for your work. If you want to be successful in your job, then you make time for the training that you need to do. If you want to get close to God, then you make time for God. And we're told to make time for all of these things. No one really ever tells you to make time for grief. And I think it's really important to seek, put that on a list of your priorities. Because if you don't, then you're going to neglect it. And if you don't, then you're going to bottle up all of these emotions inside of you. And it's not healthy. But I was also going to say a lot of something that I've been hearing people say throughout this entire thing. I don't necessarily I don't necessarily like it, is that in order to be emotionally strong, that means not showing your emotions. And to me, that's completely backward, because it's like, how are you supposed to be emotionally healthy and emotionally strong if you hold in your emotions, if you hold in that anxiety? And so I think instead of placing it in that context, we should say that the emotional strength comes in being able to seek out a counselor, being able to seek out therapy, being able to put that on your priority list so that you can deal with this. Because if not, you're going to be emotionally weak, and you're going to be emotionally broken and emotionally unhealthy because you haven't dealt with this grieving process, and you've decided to keep everything in. And so I think definitely you have to find the time, you have to make the time, push other things aside so that you can make the time to get through this. And as a result, you will do better in the other things that you need to do.
That is true.
Very good.
Listen, folks, we're going to go to Johnny, and then I saw Matthew, and then I saw Donovan, and then I saw Jessica. Johnny, go ahead.
I feel like Aisha and Danielle said, you have to make time for grieving, because grieving comes with a lot, and especially like those, myself included, who have dealt with losses like back to back to back to back to back. It can be very hard to make time to grieve, because one death or one loss happens, and then another loss happens, and then another loss happens, and you haven't even like processed the first loss. So it is kind of hard to process different losses back to back to back. So I feel like you just have to make time, because if you don't, then it's going to lead you down a very, very bad path.
Yes.
And I like one other thing too that Johnny said when we interviewed her for the podcast. She said, I just had to swallow my pride and say, I need help. Very mature. Swallow the pride and get the help that you need.
Yes. I think it was Matthew, then Donovan, and then Jessica, and then haven't heard from Ephraim yet. Yeah.
He said, okay.
All right.
So, for me personally, I wouldn't say I'm good at dealing with grief in any way. So like for me, I do kind of suppress emotions and stuff. I know it's not good, but it's a lot easier to just keep on going and stuff. And even to the point where you could give yourself a packed schedule and just have stuff to do all the time, so you don't even take time to actually grieve. I know the first semester of sophomore year was one of my hardest semesters. And I was depressed for pretty much that whole semester. But it was also my busiest semester. And I also was, people always see me as like kind of a happy person at the same time. But it was also like one of my worst semesters. And to a certain extent, I still haven't really come out of like some of those like different stages and stuff, like depression or anger. It might be switching back and forth, but I found kind of ways to cope with it. So I feel like I don't really have the like the full answer to, because it's something that I personally haven't figured out yet either. But I think it is good to kind of focus on like the underlying issues as well, because it's really easy to come up with coping mechanisms, and that's where like a lot of people start to drink or like smoke, because that stuff makes you feel good. It pleases you, and you find a moment like for a moment you could be happy, for a moment you could do this, and you're living life, but it's still not the underlying issue. So there's always going to be something that you're, in a sense, even if you're not running away from that, there's something that you haven't dealt with yet. So like it could even be healthy things too. Like I work out whenever I'm stressed and stuff, but that's still not, that might be helping me to just get through the day and stuff, but it's still not dealing with what I'm actually going through. So yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
That is so important. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad you mentioned that sometimes with grief, we can take a good thing and overdo it, overstress our body with, unnecessarily extra exercise or overeat good food. And then it creates other problems. Now
Right.
we have high blood pressure or we have obesity to deal with on top
Pulled
of
muscle from trying to bench press too much,
yeah.
Matthew.
I hit 200.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, you mentioned something about stages, that you feel like you go in and out between a couple of different stages.
Yeah.
And that's important for people to know too, that grief is not linear. And I'm sure the doctors would agree, not linear, but it's a cycle and everybody's different. Yes. And then Matthew and then Donovan.
Okay, yeah. So like for me, like it definitely is not linear, and everybody grieves in a different way.
Yes.
And but one thing I do notice though, it's like some things like they kind of just get me at the same time. Cause like quick story, last week, well this like Friday that just passed, I broke down for a while in the conference room and just started crying while I was working. It was a tough week, and some patients passed away, and it's different like seeing them like the day before and actually seeing them, and then the next day it's like they're gone and stuff. So even though I wasn't close to them, like people mentioned that accumulative grief, it kind of came back. So then whenever I was hearing like a nurse talk about hospice with another patient, it came back and it tugged strings that I thought I had buried in the past, or not even buried, but I thought I had under control enough, at least in public, where I wouldn't just start breaking down and crying. But I just had to walk out and go straight to the conference room and then just bawl for a little bit.
Yeah, wow. And those are called triggers.
Yeah,
those are called triggers, and they'll happen for quite some time. There'll always be a trigger. Donovan and then Jessica.
Well, no, I think it's a great point my mom made in regards to, grief not being linear. And, there's no wrong way or right way per se to process grief. In the book Grief Observed, C.S. Lewis talks about, he thought he could describe it as a state, but he realized that grief is not a state, but it's a process. And then my way of learning to process and to really, make time for my mental health, because if you don't make time for your mental health, you're never really going to process your grief. So for me, to try to encapsulate, how it was that I'm feeling in the process to those emotions, I started writing more. I like to share two of those quotes, actually. One thing I wrote shortly after, thinking about after my brother died, it was that the soul yearns to thrive and survive. It's an innate concept seared into the hearts of men, always searching for a way to win. Knocked down, battered, and bruised, forlorn, forgotten, and stuck in a ruse. Sometimes the prisons of our souls are built on our own accord as we try to find a way to avoid the double-edged sword. Like Rapunzel at the top of a castle, a prisoner never knowing freedom is just outside of the window. Instead, free falling like Alice in Wonderland, we make ourselves matter like the Hatter. Like fragile glass, our mental walls shatter. How do we cope? When will it end? The night is filled with terror and makes our very souls cringe. To be or not to be, Hamlet's age-old question about life, but what do we do when life is like a serrated knife that leaves you jagged, paying fate's ultimate price? So this for me was a day that I was feeling down. I was feeling my despair this day. But then actually the very next day I wrote, remember you wear a crown when life gives you a frown, when your life's dreams seem shattered, when the desires of your life are scattered. Like the chaff in the wind, your heart doubles over in two, and the pieces can be mended even with super glue. Humpty Dumpty at life, the ground from under you caves, after you were being buried alive in a shallow, empty grave. Depths of despair that no man can know, when will it end, and when will you again once obtain your glow? Life is fickle and the fate's pernicious. The living hell you feel is pretentious, but always remember your crown. So it's always important to be able to express yourself. Sometimes we're not genuine with ourselves on how we're feeling. And so unless we're genuine with ourselves on how we're feeling, we'll never be able to cope and actually process and actually deal with what the root of our issues and grief may be.
Wow.
I'm gonna have to get you and Matthew together, because Matthew is also one that can spit the word. He can do it. So I have to get you and Matthew together. That was beautiful.
That
Thank you,
was
Donovan.
absolutely beautiful.
Jessica.
Yeah, to what Donovan was sharing about being genuine about expressing yourself, I could definitely relate to that, because personally for me, I have found solace in writing. I like to sing. I like to kind of do paint and different very artistic hobbies. But I have found that journaling has helped me process my thoughts. And to what has been shared before about the accumulative and collective grief, I think was another term that was shared. Going back to the death of Carvel, going back to what one of our doctors had mentioned about the social unrest between these between minorities, between Black and brown communities, faced with all of this tragic loss of police brutality. And I know this year it was and I'm sure many can relate, it was very triggering seeing all of the images on social media every single day, waking up and not only seeing all the lost lives because of COVID, but because of seeing so many stories coming back to surface about those who had died at the hands of police brutality. And for me, it was very heartbreaking. And at first it felt a little bit awkward, because I personally didn't know the individuals who passed away because of police brutality. I personally did not know Carvel, but because these are people who are involved in a community, Carvel being a part of the Oakwood community, then those victims in police brutality being a part of just the greater, community of people of color, it did affect me. And I can say that though, I'll be the one to, tell people, yes, give yourself permission to express and give yourself permission to feel. I struggle with that personally. And I'm the one, I don't like to cry in front of people. I try to be the strong one for everybody. But I remember, I think Chapman had said once at an assembly, and I can't remember word per word, but paraphrasing, it was almost like, don't feel like you have to be strong enough. And I think every day I have to remind myself that it's okay for me to break down. And as mentioned before, it's okay to cry. It's not weakness, but me crying could show that I too, need help. I don't have it all together. And so I definitely can relate to how writing and even doing video diaries, I whip up my computer and I literally sit there, push record, and just talk. And so that's just really helped me to get all of my thoughts out there and to be able to express in grief.
Excellent. Ephraim.
Man, I've been super blessed just to, listen to the culmination of what everyone is saying. Truly, personally, myself, dealing with grief. I remember for me, it was, especially after the death of Justin, I was like, for me, it was like there was a disconnect between friends and family. And what do I mean by that? Because I was so because for me, it was like, wow, I had experienced this loss. It was so hard for me to even let the closest people into me. So there's this huge disconnect because I didn't want to experience the pain, the loss of having someone someone in my life lose someone again. I had this disconnect, and even so much was the pain that even my family members, I started pushing them out. And it goes to speak of what you guys already mentioned, that we weren't meant to do this alone. We weren't meant to do life alone. And I can vouch testimony after testimony of Mama Hannah's, Miss Vanessa, just her consistency in always letting me know that you are not alone. And I remember this scripture And Bible scholars out there, you're going to have to help me with this. I believe Joab's in battle, and he's with his brother, and he's coming upon this encampment, this city. And all of a sudden, as he gets to the city's gates, he realizes, as he looks behind him, that he's surrounded. And he tells this to his brother. He says to his brother, if the army before you is too strong for you, I will help you. Mm-hmm. But if the army before me is too strong for me, help me. Mm. And it's so amazing because that scripture, I remember, would help me get through so many times where I was like, okay, let me just disconnect from the world. Let me just, be Ephraim and just step back and not accept the help, not acknowledge that I'm going through pain, not acknowledge that I'm going through grief. But in reality, we were never meant to be alone. And what's beautiful about this is he goes on to state that God will do what he pleases. And that story goes on to share how God fought the battle. They didn't have to fight the battle, that God fought the battle. And oftentimes it reminded me that even though today might be hard, and this was a theme that my brother Justin would say, even though that today was hard, I was one step closer to the goal. I was one step closer to the prize. So you may not see the light. We may not even at the moment believe that there is hope at the end of the tunnel, but move one step closer, knowing that it's God that supplies the faith, the strength for us to proceed through the battles in life.
Wow.
Amen. Well, that was worth waiting for, young man. I've been wanting to hear your voice. It's been a while.
Praise the Lord.
Thank
Praise the
you
Lord.
so much for sharing that.
Praise God.
Donovan, you had something else you wanted to share?
Oh no, I had said it. Well, into that also, as far as this year, 2020 has brought on its own stress and perplexities. Every time I think about 2020, I think about that the Charles Dickens quote. He says it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, but it was also the age, but he ends off that quote, it was also the age of a new day. It was also an age of hope. So despite, all the evil and anxiety that we've seen this year, we've also seen some of the best of humanity in this collective and cumulative anxiety and grief that we've all been experiencing this year. Wow. And the biggest thing in combating grief and wherever it be is being able to pull together. So there's been dissension this year, but also just as much dissension, there's been a lot of people of different backgrounds, beliefs, and faiths who have pulled together with understanding that we're not in this alone. And the more that we extend that not only to people within the church, outside the church, whoever we meet, that we're not in this alone. At the end of the day, we are all our brother's keeper. And and if we want to get off this planet in any type of any type of one piece, we've got to come together as a community. And the community is not just based in the church. The community is based on all of us who are living on this terrestrial ball we call Earth.
Wow.
Well, listen. Wow, Donovan, thank you. I guess you all see now why we invited this group of people for just such a time as this. We're in the midst of something that is unprecedented. We talk about 1917, 18, whatever the date was for the Spanish flu. Mm-hmm. But this is something that is so strange, especially we're so modern and we have all the answers in science. Mm-hmm. And look where we are now. So we've gone a little over the time, but I'm glad we did. Yeah. My wife has a question for our two doctors to end with. But before she does that, does anyone else have anything short to say that they feel as though they really needed to say about this subject? And they needed to say it now before we mute everybody and let the doctors. And Matthew?
Well, I just wanted to say that especially when things like this first happen, it it never feels like it's fully gone and stuff, but always take one moment at a time. Just take one day. Don't get overwhelmed thinking all in the future. Just get through one moment at a time, and then you'll see where you've come from. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's serious wisdom.
Yeah.
Serious wisdom.
And so I would like to say to our doctors, just to, well, first of all, I want to say about the young people, all of those who are listening right now, and all of those who will be listening, are truly going to be blessed by each and every one of you. Thank you so much for your sharing.
And not only blessed, educated.
Yes.
You know, the miseducation. I'm not even going to finish the title of that book, but as Christians, we've been, and I see Ron laughing, we've been educated improperly about grief. And thank you today to our youth and young adults for guiding us in the right direction. And now, my wife, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to ask Dr. McGowan to give some takeaways for those who are still listening, some final words of encouragement for Dr. McGowan as well as Dr. Swenson.
Okay. First of all, thanks again for giving me the opportunity to participate in this. I have been enriched tremendously by the words of the youth. They have normalized grief, which I think is one of the things that's so important. They've shared some very painful experiences, but they have created this picture of grief being a bridge from an event over to a landing spot where wholeness, or some semblance of wholeness, and a resumption of a productive lifestyle can occur with holes in your being.
Yeah.
From whatever the event was. And that, as Terry has told us, allows us to be more giving to others. I like the story that he shared about hugging the young lady who had lost her sister. That's a powerful thing. The hug is so powerful. And just dovetailing on what Camille said, and we didn't really talk about this very much, about the grief from that COVID has brought to us and our families. She's there in Atlanta, and her family is here in Los Angeles. Now we have Zoom. Zoom allows us to help to resolve some of the problem of not having our communities together like they should be. But once we figure out how to give a hug on Zoom, I think we'll probably be okay.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But we're still sort of suffering here. But let me say this: when you're going through a grief process, do the best you can. People, as has been said many times before, people grieve in all sorts of ways. What is helpful if we can continue with the basics of living a healthy life, getting rest if you can. Sometimes the sleep is very much challenged, so that may be an issue. Getting exercise. Exercise is very, very important. I think that was mentioned maybe by Matthew, and he talked about lifting 200 pounds, bench pressing. That's a long time ago for me.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah. Those I want to mention that because those things are important. Things that sort of help keep you going along the path as much as possible. Try to stay with those. And I'm saying that because it is sort of a goal that you can sort of keep in mind. But sometimes your motivation to do those things go away, and that's okay. Because as has already been mentioned, there are different phases of this grieving process. The 5 different things that Terry mentioned, the depression, anger, denial, and acceptance, finally, all those sort of things, which, by the way, you may go through 1 or 2 of those and you're ready, you've crossed the bridge. So it's quite variable for individual. Then I'll go back to the normalization. That's very, very important. The things that kept you rooted, as much as possible, try to keep them rooted. The talking is so important. If there's someone you can talk to, talk.
Yeah.
the presence. If you can find someone that is present with you, that's important. If you can be present with someone when the coin has been turned over, very, very important. And the talking and the listening. And as they say, this too shall pass. You will be like Swiss cheese when you come out of it, but you will still be cheese.
Yeah, that is so true. Thank you, Dr. Ron.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you.
appreciate it.
Dr. Terry.
I'd say this, you know, it's interesting, all the colloquialisms that we have as cultures. When you travel around and try to use these sayings in other cultures, it makes no sense. So you have to learn to describe them. Here's one of them. There's always a silver lining. Have you ever heard that one?
Oh,
Yes.
There's always a silver lining. You know what there is? We're living in, wow, understatement, any word that I could use, chaotic, crazy, dark times. But you know what? And dare I even say political climate,
have mercy.
in our social climate, in our scientific climate, in our health climate, it's chaos. But what I have seen that gives me great hope is we live in a world where what makes you a valuable person is what you do and what you have. What you do and what you have. And that's garbage. Because in God's climate, it's who you are and how you live. And who you are beloved. Beloved daughters and sons of God. And how you live matters. If you go on the gallery view of this, we all look a little bit different, with different ages, genders, experiences. But one thing we all said in common in our grief was we have pain, we have tears, we have confusion, we have anxiety, we have hurt. And the other thing that we said that's important is we need each other.
Yeah.
Jesus said when he was asked, what's the greatest thing in the kingdom of God? I'll end with this. And this has been transformational for me in my life. In Matthew 22:37-40, Jesus said, you want to know what it's all about? He was asked, what's the greatest commandment? What is it? And Jesus said, okay, I'll tell you. He said, the first thing is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Physically, mentally, emotionally, and physically. He says 3 loves. First, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then love your neighbor as yourself. Now, normally we say, oh yeah, love God, love everybody else, and then us. That is not what he said. He said, love me. Why? Because we don't know what real love is. We live in a mess. Our parents tried, our friends tried, but we're all broken. I'm the only perfect person on Zoom, right? In this
Excuse me?
Yeah, these guys know too much. But God says, let me tell you, with you, when I say I love you, I love you. We come with conditional love. I love you if you look right, act right, do what I want, say what I want, or I'm not going to love you and I pull back. But when God says it, he says, I love you. Jesus said, I love you. I love you. But I blew it. I did this. I know, I love you. That hurt you, hurt me. And when we say that kind of love, it comes to what's been said here that we don't do well. And listen, I suck at this. I am horrible at this. In fact, in my life, I see a therapist because I have PTSD and I have issues that I've come with that don't wait till you're my age to go get it fixed, please. But what was asked of me recently in my journey is this, Terry, how do you love yourself? And you know, somebody hits a point when you can't say anything. And so God says, listen, I love you. So what is it you don't love? What are you not doing about loving yourself? It's not what you do or what you have. Who are you? And then you can love other people. You can't pour a drink out of an empty cup. And you can't fill your cup. It's God filling you.
Yeah.
So the silver lining is this. We're all seeing that, hey, you know what? Even I learned a new word this week, centibillionaires. Have you heard that one? Centibillionaires?
That's a new one.
Bezos, these guys, Zuckerberg, centibillionaires mean they have over $1,000 billion.
That's
Wow.
ridiculous.
$100 billion. I'm like, but yet they get COVID.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
They die.
Yeah.
So what
Yes.
you're called, what you have doesn't mean a thing,
Mm.
but who you are and whose you are matter. So the silver lining is we're saying, you know what, all this societal structures, all this thing that says this is how I should look and act, it's not helping me get off this Zoom screen one bit.
Mm.
So for us to change is to realize the greatest thing that God gives in this universe is one thing, love.
Mm.
And that's what I've learned. And I want to thank all of you for blessing me and letting me be on this screen. I know who said, like, oh, Dr. Terry. I'm like, oh, they're going to think I know something. This isn't going to go well. All I know is I can tell you a lot what not to do or what doesn't work, but I can tell you what works is just loving people and opening up and letting God live, and then going into a room with a person and not say, yes, I'm Dr. Swenson, let me, whatever. It's coming and saying, oh man, I know that hurt. What are you doing about it?
Yeah.
And let the healing come.
Yeah.
That's it. Can't say anything better than that.
Wow. Well, I want to thank personally my two old friends. I think they're older than me. I guess you can tell. I think they're older than me, even though we were in grade school and high school and college together and all of that. I know. I'm pulling all of your legs. But this has been quite an experience, and it's
amazing.
And it's not going to be the last experience. I have all of your numbers, and we will do this. Like I said, this is our first annual, but this is something that we have committed to doing for the rest of our lives here on planet Earth, because we need the proper education on how to grieve and still be okay with God, how to be angry. Thank you, Camille, for that.
Yes.
How to be angry, frustrated, see how things suck. I haven't used that word in a long time. And still be all right with God, because he does not stop loving us.
Nothing we can do.
Nothing we can do to make
him
him stop loving us. My wife has something very special she wants to show right now.
Well, of course, we're still talking about grief. And as we go through the process, we can allow it, we can grow from it and allow it to make us better, or we can live the rest of our lives out bitter. So I decided, well, God inspired me to write. Someone mentioned writing. Writing was very therapeutic for me. And the Lord inspired me to write a book. It took a long time. I started this process in 2016, but found it to be so painful that I would just put it aside. The Lord kept speaking to me, and the book is almost a reality. I have the cover that I want to share with you, the cover of the book. It will not be available for purchase until probably the latter part of January. Pursuing Hope, the story of Justin Hannah. And this book, it has multiple themes. It's about Justin's life. This was my son that passed away in my baby son, Donovan's brother that he mentioned, passed away in 2012. So it's about different parts of his life. It's about parental love. It's about the hard journey, the dark periods. It's about pursuing hope. The Bible tells us that faith is the substance of things hoped for. So without hope, we're just lost. So pursuing hope. This is a tool for people who have lost loved ones in particular, especially for parents who have lost children. for siblings who have lost siblings, for people who just want to learn how to better interact with people dealing with loss. So this is a tool that God gave me to give to the world. So please look for more information. Let's put that, if you could put that slide up one more time, please. So look for on Facebook and Instagram for information showing when the book will be available. There's going to be a book launch. So look for that information and plan to join us there for that book launch and share it with everyone.
And I'm not saying this because this is my wife, but I was one of the privileged ones to read it, and unbelievably powerful. And others have read it across the nation, and that's been the only thing that they had to say. They said, powerful. I need to get it. I need to give it to as many people as I possibly can. So,
and Donovan actually wrote a chapter in the book as well. When I first saw the cover, all I could do was cry.
Yeah.
I mean, I remembered, I mean, that backpack and everything, but hope. The purpose is, you know, not to just make people feel, but to know that there's hope on the other side of that darkness, what we can go through and have the hope of Christ. And I share exactly the pathway that God led me through and that others can follow.
Excellent. So I'm just don't want to end, but we have to. We are blessed and thrilled that we have this opportunity to serve you, to serve those who will be listening later, those who are listening now, God's people. And we do this out of a heart of love. And this is something that God led us to do. And once again, thank you, Carmen, for that sermon. Camille. Why do I keep saying Carmen? I'm thinking about your niece.
Hopefully
Camille.
Carmen's out there listening.
Yeah,
watching.
hopefully. But Camille, thank you.
We also want to let you all know that on Facebook, we have a page, Verrett Ministry Grief Support. So if you know someone who's grieving, we try to put information out there that's helpful to people who are grieving. So that's Verrett Ministry Grief Support. And I believe we have a slide for that as well. A reminder to join the podcast, follow the podcast. The Struggle is Real on Grief. It's on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcast, and anywhere where you enjoy listening to podcasts. Do follow and then share it with others. Share it on your page, on your Facebook pages, your Instagram pages. Help us get the word out about these resources. Our YouTube page.
Especially our YouTube page also, which is under Verrett Ministry.
Yes. Share it, share it, share it.
Well, we want to thank you. And we're going to close right now with a word of prayer. Let's bow our heads. Father, thank you. This has been so informative, and we thank you that you sent the Holy Spirit to touch each heart, that each individual was very candid with what they had to say. We've heard some things, dear Lord, and we all need to help others as much as you have helped us. Yes. So bless us, dear Lord. Take us from this place, but never ever from your presence, until we meet on Zoom, on Facebook, on YouTube once again. We love you, praise you, and thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Ooh, and I have to thank our technical director. I can't forget that.
Yeah, he's the one that put all this up, or you would have never seen the slides the way they were. Thank you so much, folks.